So, thanks for joining us. Buongiorno, Francesco. Nice to see you from Italy. Thanks for joining along. Sandy, thank you for joining us. Today's topic, and of course today we're not doing a feed from the living room in front of the monitor, or from the library in front of the books, or from the window for that matter, but we're here in the studio next door, high atop the Museum of Modern Art. And what I want to talk about today is, if you didn't shoot it, it didn't happen. It's a euphemism, but I'm trying to make a much larger point here, and that's about the power of the medium and the power of a multiplicity of cameras as opposed to just one person having one camera and a couple of people. It's what this revolution is really all about. 500 years ago, to go back in time, 517 years ago to be much more exact, Johannes Gutenberg put a piece of vellum paper into a modified olive oil press and printed the first page of his Bible. By doing that, he set off a revolution that took us in that moment from the medieval world to the world of modernity that we still live in today. The difference is that before Gutenberg, the printed word was in the hands of only a very few people. It was people in the church or the monarchy that could decide what was printed. After Gutenberg, it opened up the door to anyone who had an idea who was free to publish. This was a radical move. Gutenberg, by the way, had no idea what he was doing. Gutenberg actually was bankrupt. He had got this idea to have polished mirrors to reflect holy light, and that was the business he was in. He borrowed a ton of money to get into the business, and he went broke. And so he needed the money to pay back his creditors, or he was going to go to debtor's prison. And so he came up with this idea of making cheap Bibles. But cheap Bibles was the idea. What he did instead was open the door to anyone who had the right to publish. This was revolutionary, and it offset all kinds of changes, because now it meant that anyone was free to publish any idea they wanted to publish. Prior to that, only what the church allowed or the monarchy allowed that was published. And that, of course, is the world that we live in today. That's where novels come from. That's where newspapers come from. That's where publishing comes from. That's where Facebook comes from. That's where Twitter comes from. This notion of the democratization of the medium. Now, this is really important. We established with Gutenberg, we established what we would call the world of print. And the print-oriented world is a world that we all lived in together. That's where the United States Constitution as a written document comes from. We lived in a print-based world, and all our information came from print and from text. And that was great, because we understand a free press. That's where novels comes from. That's where books comes from. That's where newspapers come from. That's where the printed word comes from that. And we all went to school and we learned how to be print literate. Except we don't live in a world of print anymore. We live increasingly in a world of television and video. Very much the same thing. Television is an incredibly powerful medium in terms of dictating public discourse and what we think and who we vote for and what we buy. The average American watches 5 hours of television a day, every single day. The average American spends 19 minutes a day reading. So we live in a video, television-dominated world. But that world of television is controlled by a handful of corporations, ABC, NBC, CNBC, CNN, Fox, and they set the public agenda. And the reason they do that is that no one else is allowed to put stuff into it except for the people who work for those giant media companies. And there's something fundamentally wrong with that. Now, the fact is that the technology restricted who could get access to this incredibly powerful medium. And up until now, it was only people who went to work for NBC or you went to work for Fox. Of course, you go to work for Fox, you put on the air what Murdoch wants you to put on the air. It's not a free press. It was a very controlled and carefully and a closed press. But now, these little iPhones, and I have one here, and I'm sure you have one too, or a smartphone, these little iPhones, these are the printing press of the 21st century. In other words, they give everyone the ability to create whatever it is they want to create and to put it into this matrix of public discourse. And that's what the whole internet is really all about. So what has NBC got that you don't got? I don't know, they got big buildings, they got big studios, they got big cameras, but other than that, they don't really have anything any different than the Catholic Church had, as opposed to Gutenberg, or later Martin Luther, who was this little unknown monk who began publishing stuff that flipped over the whole religious world. You don't need a big building, you don't need studios, all you need is an iPhone and an idea. And of course some training, which we can give you at VJ.com, thevj.com, go check out the website. At any rate, What I wanted to talk about now, really, besides this revolution, which to me is critically important because I think we're only going to get decent television and decent television journalism when we get it out of the hands of Lester Holt, nothing personal Lester, and put it into the hands of millions and millions of people, which is exactly what we did with print 500 years ago and exactly what makes print such a powerful and broad and rich medium. If we ran the world of print the way we run the world of television, you go into Barnes and Noble, they're still in business, right? And you would find 8 books. This is Lester Holt's book, and this is Katie Couric's book, and this is Walter Cronkite's book, and that's all you would have in the whole bookstore, which would be nuts. Instead, you go in a place like Barnes & Noble or go to Amazon, and there are millions of books. It doesn't mean you have to read all of them. In fact, you read very few of them. But the fact is, everyone has the right and the opportunity, and in some ways in a democracy, the responsibility of publishing their ideas. Well, now, in a democratic society, you have the responsibility of publishing your ideas in video, which is an incredibly plastic and powerful and simple to do medium. Look, to do this thing, all I had to really turn on the phone and talk to you. And you can talk back if you have questions. That's how the whole thing works. So the title of today's talk was, If You Didn't Shoot It, It Didn't Happen. And this really came to me after looking at Sandy Bacon's, I pronounced that right now, Sandy, right? Thanks for the note. Sandy Bacon's video that we showed you the day before yesterday, in which she had gone to one of these congressional meetings and videotaped this incredibly powerful talk that this woman who was going to lose her health care because of the ACA withdrawal, or killing ACA, was going to get. And of course, no network was there because networks can't shoot everything. And so the fact that she shot it and she put it on the air, and then it got 3 million views, which is absolutely astonishing, tells you everything about the power of the medium and the power of an individual to change the world. So, what does this mean? What does this mean if you didn't shoot it, it didn't happen? If we depended only on the cameras from MSNBC or Fox, whatever your perspective is, to tell us what was happening in the world, we would only end up seeing 0.00001% of what is actually happening in the world, because there are many more things happening in the world, or in your state, or in your city, or in your community. There are many more things happening in your community than you actually get to see on television. Now, let's talk about television news for a minute, because that is an important, they are the filter of what you get to see. Television news, whether it's cable or it's broadcast, sets the agenda for what the rest of us end up talking about, even if you see what we're talking about in newspapers or online in these endless discussions that go on. And God knows I have enough political discussions on my own Facebook page. But all the things we end up talking here, the agenda is set more than anything else by what you see on MSNBC or CNN or places like that. And how do they decide what they're going to put on the air? They put on the air what gets an audience. They are a business, after all. So even though they may be presented with 1 million possible stories that go on the planet, and there are probably 1 billion stories every day that could be done, they have to filter it down to 5 or 6 or 8 stories that they decide they want to focus on. The result is that as viewers and as a population, we get a very, very warped picture of what the world is like. Now, conservatives like to say that, the New York Times, CNN is biased this way, and liberals like to say, Fox is biased this way. They're not biased anyway. The only way they're biased is to making a profit. And the reason they're biased that way is because they give their viewers what they want to see. Well, giving a viewer what they want to see doesn't really do anybody any good, because if it doesn't make you think, and it doesn't make you question what's going on in the world or your pre-held conceptions, then you've wasted your time. So these TV cable channels, they become reinforcers of crap. And the crap they put on, sorry to say, is just the stuff that will get them an audience so they can sell advertising time, so they can sell money. It's a business. It's entertainment. Do not think of this as journalism. It's not journalism, it's entertainment. Journalism is going on all over the world. News stories are going on all over the world. But if you're limited to the number of cameras that CNN has or MSNBC has, which is not very many, I read an op-ed piece once by the managing editor of the New York Times, and he said, what a fantastic job I have. I get to go into my office every day, and I have 50 correspondents in 35 bureaus around the world, whatever the number was paltry. The number was pathetic. To think you cover the world with 35 bureaus or 35 correspondents or 50 correspondents out of, 7 billion people? I mean, that is pathetic. There are 3.5 billion smartphones in the world. Every one of those smartphones is capable of doing what we are doing now. Everyone who has a smartphone is capable of doing what Sandy Bacon did 2 days ago and showing something she feels is important to 3 million people. She didn't have to sell it to CNN. I know you're upset that nobody buys your stuff, Sandy, but the point of the fact is you can bypass CNN. You don't have to sell it. You don't have to go and say, oh, CNN, please look at this great piece of video that I just shot. It's really good. Because Sandy was someplace that she thought was important, and she put it out, and 3 million people saw the video. Now, if we take Sandy's experience and we multiply that by 100,000, 200,000, a million, imagine a million cameras in play around the world capturing the things that a million people think are important and showing that to 7 or 8 billion people. Well, it makes MSNBC look like that, which is what they are in terms of the reality of the world. So this notion of we have the right, CNN has the right, NBC has the right, the power to decide what the rest of the world will see, that NBC or CBS or Fox has the power to set the agenda for public discourse, and the rest of us, our job is to listen as passive observers of the world that goes by, is bullshit. It's bullshit. It was created because the technology of original broadcasting was so expensive and so difficult to do that only a tiny full of very, very rich people could afford to do it. But those days are over. This thing, we started talking about Gutenberg. Gutenberg's revolution allowed anyone with an idea to publish. And that is where the world of books and magazines and newspapers and even the text you read on the internet comes from. It comes from this inherent idea that we, the public, create the content. The United States Constitution is a printed document. It's a product of the Gutenberg Revolution. And the very first amendment of the Constitution doesn't say you have the right to vote, and it doesn't say no taxation without representation. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging a free press, because the people who wrote that document, I'm reading Jefferson's biography now, the people who wrote that document understood that a free press is the foundation of a democratic society. We don't live in a world of print anymore. We live in a world of television and video. And that's why it's critical that we have a free press, an open dialogue, an open public discourse in the world of video, as opposed to in print. You cannot surrender the right and the responsibility of what the world discusses and what constitutes news and journalism to a handful of people who work for private corporations whose only interest is in making a profit. So I urge you, this is a revolution. This is not just how to make better cat videos. What we're talking about here is a revolution in terms of who has the power to decide what public discourse is going to be. And the power should exist in your hands, not in their hands. Your job is not to be an observer. Your job is to be a participant. Get the concept? And of course, the only way you can do this is to become video literate. When you went to school, they taught you how to read and write, but they didn't teach you how to shoot and cut compelling videos. And that's why we launched thevj.com, which I urge you to take a look at, and I urge you even more to join. Join, become video literate, join the revolution, participate in this thing, give yourself the voice you deserve. Well, that's pretty good. That made 20 minutes, right? Do we have any questions?
No questions.
No questions from the viewers. Well, that pretty much wraps up our 20-minute live feed for today. I hope you found this interesting. We'll be back on thevj.com next Thursday at 12:30. We'll be taking your questions. If you have questions or issues you want to be dealt with, email us at contact at thevj.com, or tomorrow I'm probably going to be doing one of these things back from the living room. So thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it.